Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard. I went from being a lawyer and partner at one of the largest firms in America to becoming an online personality and successful entrepreneur. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your health and personal life. So, how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you chase joy while achieving success? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back to Hustle and Flow. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and we are on episode 208. And today we've got a little bit of a different episode where I'm going to share a really, really cool experience that I just had over the past weekend. So it's very fresh on my mind, and I'm super excited to share it with you. Before we get started, I did want to let you know that I am sending out a special piece of snail mail. But I do need your address. So if you want that in the mail, if you want that special delivery, all you have to do is go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/snail mail. Let's get to today's episode, which is all about my trip to Harlem, New York. I have been to New York many times. I love New York City, but I have never been to Harlem. And I want to share with you why I was there, what I was doing there, as well as my experience, my thoughts. So, first, I have to tell you about Dr. Lynn Maureen Hurdle Price. Now, you may actually already know her if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, because she was on episode number 53. Yeah, we're going way back. Lynn and I met in 2017 in Hawaii, and it was random that we were there together, but we immediately hit it off, and we have been connected and friends ever since. So she is known as the conflict closer, and that is what we talked about in episode 53. We talked about having difficult conversations. Fast forward, I believe it was, I don't remember, was it 2018, 2019? Two white women who were asking Lynn some very uneducated questions. They were, and she was helping them understand racism. And they were like, well, will you teach us? Will you teach us white women about racism? And she was like, absolutely not. Right? Like, absolutely not. This is not my job. You can go learn that on your own. And they continued to ask some really offensive, uneducated questions. And she was like, well, you're going to have to pull out your credit card. And they're like, here's the credit card. She was like, no, I'm not doing that. But she finally decided, I think I actually will do that. And so she started what's now known as On the Matter of Race. And there are 5+ levels at this point. It was not something that she sought out to do on her own. It was not something she wanted to do, but she decided to do it. And I am looking at the website. I'm going to actually share this with you later, but in her own words, this is what it is. On the Matter of Race, a facilitated journey toward open, meaningful, honest conversations about racism and taking action to address it, designed for white people. So I actually joined in, oh my goodness, when was it? It might have been 2020 or 2021. It was definitely after George Floyd had died, and we had a spark. We had a moment where everyone was showing up saying, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And, I think we do this regularly. When something big happens, white people show up and say, I'm here, I'm in, and then we disappear and we go away. We're like, checked that box. And so at that time, for me, why I wanted to get involved with the work that she was doing was I feel like I have always spoken up. I have always talked about racism and how we need to work on it, whether I was speaking on a stage or even on this podcast. But I was realizing at that time that I was getting paid to do some of that work. And I really had to stop and reflect on what was my role and should I be doing that? Should I be taking away a paid opportunity from a Black woman or another person of color that definitely has a lived experience that I do not, and may not be getting the opportunities when they should be the ones getting paid to do that work. And so that's how I actually showed up and said, Lynn, I want to dig deeper into this and how I show up. And I just want to be even more committed to the work in recognizing my role. Because if you have ever listened to this podcast or followed me on social media, you know, I know, we all know, I can have a tendency to preach and point my finger when it comes to racism. And so it was at that time when she was doing this work and had been several levels in where I asked, would this be something good for me, where I can start to look more at what is my role and what else can I be doing? And how can I really start to not point the finger, but truly look at myself, right? Start at home. And so I worked with her several years, several levels on that. And she then started doing an On the Matter of Race live. She started this last year. So in DC, that was the very first one. In September, she had the very first group where those who are going through the program, like I said, it's now at the women who first started, by the way, they're still with her. They are at like level 5C or D, and now they're starting a liberation work program. So everyone that is part of that program is invited to come. And last year I was in France during that time. And so I told Lynn, so I helped sponsor it, but I said, I really want to attend. So when you do this again, will you let me know? And so we were talking, I guess, I don't know, earlier this year, earlier this spring, and she brought up that they were going to be doing it in New York. And I said, oh, I want to come. And she was like, oh my gosh, there's actually only 2 spots left. Do you want one? I'm like, yes. And so I just gave her the credit card. I said, no matter what's happening, I will come. And then y'all know I love my football. I love my NFL football. Um, and then I realized as we were getting closer to the date that it was the home opener for the Titans, and we have season tickets, and it was against the Jets. And I was like, how am I going to do this? Because the program was running Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the home opener was Sunday. And so I was like, well, maybe I can do Friday and Saturday, and then I'll fly out. I looked at the flights. I'll fly out Sunday morning and get back to Nashville. My husband can pick me up at the airport, and we'll just drive straight to the stadium. And so I told my husband what I was going to do, my plans on this. And he was like, wait, so let me get this straight. You only care about racism when it's convenient to you and doesn't interfere with your personal interests. Oh, dang, he got me. He got me good. Um, oh my goodness. And so I was like, okay, you're right. You are right. And this is why, regardless of how much of an ally you think you are, we have to be reminded that it is a privilege for us to step into this work. And it can be really easy to step into it when it is convenient for us. I will also say that when I was doing the work in the program, that this was also while I had the adrenal tumor, and you've heard me talk about that. And so I had nonstop cortisol, and there was just, I had so much anxiety, and I was struggling with my regulating my emotions. And at some point I got shingles. Like, so I was doing this work. Roe v. Wade was overturned with Dobbs, and I got shingles. And the doctors were like, you need to slow down a little bit with your social activism because your body is not in a place where it can handle it. And I took that advice and stepped back. What a privilege. What a privilege. Because if I was a Black person and had an adrenal tumor and all of this was happening, I couldn't fully step back, right? Because I'm still going to wake up Black. I'm still going to be dealing with everything that comes with that. And if I am a mother with a child, I can't change the fact that my children or my husband or the other Black men in my family, and women as well, but we know this especially for Black men, they can't change the fact that they are still being killed, that they may face violence. So I just note that to say it is really easy for us to only do this work when the world is riled up, like 2020. Maybe you took some anti-racism classes or some business classes around being anti-racist, and you leaned into that, and maybe you put something on your website, maybe you read some books or joined some programs, and you haven't really done much since. This is what we do. This is what we do, I think, as white people. It is something that we care about, and it's not that we stop caring, it's that it's no longer as important. It is no longer as top of mind. And there are other things, there are other interests, there are other hobbies, there are other conveniences, right? There are all these things, if we're being really, really honest, as to why we don't show up and continue to do the work. Because being an ally is not enough. It's just saying that is not enough. Caring is not enough. It truly is, what are we doing day in and day out? What are our actions? What are we actually doing proactively to help stop the continued oppression, systemic discrimination, and violence against Black people? And that is where it is hard work. It is uncomfortable work. It is draining work. And as white people, it can be so easy for us to say, another day, another time, I'm a good person. I'm not the person that needs to change. And yet, as we have seen, it is escalating. You know, when I think back to when I was growing up, when I think back to when I started being a lawyer, it was very much an issue that we weren't really addressing, but also there were some clear lines as to what was acceptable and what was unacceptable. You know, I recall growing up when we did not learn the Black history we should have learned, but we did learn about Martin Luther King Jr. We did learn about I Have a Dream. We did learn about slavery. And we are now, fast forward 30, 40 years, and we are not just maybe passively not including things in history books, we are proactively saying we're not going to teach this history because we don't want our white children to be uncomfortable. We are not going to teach this history because we think it sets up inequality to even be having that conversation. That is a very proactive form of racism that is right in our face. And that is 100, like, we know that that is going backwards. That is not progress. You know, the fact that Ron DeSantis down in Florida wants to say we should completely do away with AP Black history. Like, it's not even an option. Like, that cannot be a study. So, and then we're banning books left and right, with really, really important Black authors on really important topics around racism. And so we need to be paying attention. We should have always been paying attention, but we definitely need to be paying attention. We need to be leaning into this if we truly care about our Black and brown, but especially Black brothers and sisters who we say we love, and we don't want to be experiencing this oppression and this violence. I also think of even our Supreme Court cases, right? When I was growing up, we had Brown versus Board of Education. We are learning about that, right? We were moving forward with the progress that was being taken. And then post Trump, the Supreme Court has started reversing, doing away with voter rights. Those laws are going away. It's like, oh, the federal government no longer needs to oversee this. When we all know that racism has ratcheted up under Trump, under MAGA, under the far right Republican Party, racism is at the forefront. And you can't say that it's not when it is so proactive in trying to do away with affirmative action, when it is so proactive about talking about a DEI hire, which is the new N word, when they are so proactive with banning books. This is why, for me, I feel like pre-Trump, when we talked about politics, we could disagree. And post-Trump, when we talk about the attack on women's rights and when we talk about the attack on Black people, it is no longer about politics. It really has not been about politics since 2016. It truly is at this exact moment in history. And hopefully we get back to politics as usual. I would love to have politics as usual, where I'm still going to disagree with you, but I can at least respect you. And I know I'm preaching again, but I think that for so many of us, we can think, oh, politics don't matter, right? Like politics, religion, like we shouldn't address those issues. That in and of itself is a form of white supremacy, to say, oh, we're not going to talk about politics. We're not going to talk about religion, because that's what allows the conversations to be hushed. We are keeping the peace, right? But the only peace we are keeping is for the people who are making those comments. If we do not say, this is not about politics, and if we are talking about racism and we are talking about women's rights, we are talking about bodily autonomy, we are talking about harm, we are talking about oppression, suppression of votes. When we start talking about these things, that should not be political. That is social justice. In my mind, there is no room for argument on that. And so if you feel the same way and you are hanging out with people who are MAGA supporters or Trump supporters, being willing to have those hard conversations with family and with friends, to say, when I hear you say you're supporting that, what I hear you saying is you are supporting, or at least turning your head at, the very real racism that is being supported by that. And one of the things, this goes back to the concept of preaching, and one of the things that I really learned at this event that they just held, and by they, I was going to say, so when I first started doing this, it was Lynn, so Dr. Lynn Maureen Hurdle, but now her son, I think he's 24 years old, Justin Naeem Hurdle Price, he is also involved, and they are teaching this together, and it is even better with them joining forces, because you really get two different perspectives from different generations and different genders. It is so powerful. It is so meaningful, but they put on such an amazing event. But one of the things that we really talked about, and one of the things that I do wrong, I will raise my hand and be the first to say, I do this wrong. I can get angry really quick, and I can go for the jugular, and that is not effective. It's not effective, and it doesn't actually help, whether you want to call it the cause. It also doesn't help protect Black bodies. So one of the things that we did an entire session around it. It was so good. We learned different scenarios and ways in which to engage in conversations. And the election that is coming up is so important to this conversation. So as we're talking about the election, and politics are going to come up, whether you like it or not, whether it feels comfortable or not, it's going to come up. So being able to have the conversation of, if someone is supporting Trump, asking, do you agree with the book bans? Do you agree with the policies related to affirmative action and the gerrymandering and the voting rights? Do you agree with all of that? And get them to lean into, yes, they do, or no, they don't. And if they do, why? Exploring with them their racism, because they probably don't think or identify as racists, right? They don't think, oh, yes, I am a racist. We may look at them and be like, you are totally racist, but they probably don't identify that way. So getting them to explore their own reasons and explanations, and pushing back in a way that you are listening, while also bringing up ideas and planting seeds. That's one of the things that we talked about. It's not about convincing people. It's not about persuading people, but it is about engaging with people and having conversations. So being able to regulate your emotions and stay calm and really make them think, make them have a conversation around it. And even if they walk away where you don't agree, right? And maybe by the end it may or may not get heated, you at least had the conversation. And if they say they don't agree with those policies, then asking them why they would still vote for Donald Trump or DeSantis or others who are supporting this, and what are they doing and saying within their party to actually put an end to that, right? Because it's just as important for them to be speaking up, right? If you're a Republican and you want and you want us to no longer say you were racist or you want your party back, then do something about it. That is how you can also be anti-racist, is to say, no, I do have these positions on the economy, but I am going to hold my party responsible and accountable for social justice issues. They don't get to throw it all in a package that I'm just going to go along with. But also leaning into the conversation of, how is it that you prioritize the economy more than a person's body? How do you prioritize the economy more than a woman's body? How is it that you prioritize the economy more than a Black person's body? And forcing them to be honest about that and to give an answer. And, they probably are going to be able to justify it, but make them justify it. Make them justify it. Um, it's not comfortable. I was talking to a friend recently who said, even though I normally stay away from politics, this election is so important. It is so important for us to not go back and for us to protect. Like, we know what's coming with this and we know the harm that is already being done. And so she said, my grandfathers, my great grandfathers, they went to war for the freedom of our country. I can find the courage to have a conversation to ensure the freedom of my country. And I thought that was such a powerful statement. And it has continued to sit with me, because even though I am vocal and I talk all the time, if I am engaging just out in public, I don't generally just start conversations around politics or racism with someone I don't know, or I don't know where they stand on the issue. And she really gave me some food for thought on that, because that is an opportunity where I can lean in. We don't want to offend people. We don't want to bother people. We don't want to be that person. And yet, this is the way that we can show up, where we're not going to actual war, but we are standing up and we are fighting for our freedom and for the freedom of others. We don't have much time. We don't have much time. By the time this comes out, it is going to be less than 50 days. It is more important now than ever. And it is a great opportunity for us to talk about the election and racism. They go hand in hand. And it's really a great way for us to engage in that way. I know that is one of the things that is on my heart and that I have to start doing with those around me. And what a privilege, if we are white, to say, well, I don't want to get in those conversations. I don't want to lose friends. I don't want to have disputes with my family. Well, we don't have to do that, because we don't really have as much on the line. But if we're truly going to go to bat for, if we truly care about, if we truly want to end racism, we're willing to have those difficult, hard conversations. And we can do it. We can do it. We have to do it. So, as I mentioned, this particular, it was called a conference, but it really was an experience. It was an event. It was an intimate group. There were, I think, 30 of us total. And although it is for white people, there were definitely Black people and other people of color in the room. And it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to engage in those conversations. So it was in Harlem. Like I mentioned, it was in Harlem. I have never been to Harlem. What I have always heard about Harlem is that it is violent, that it is dangerous, and that it is not where a white person should go. And so I loved that we were doing it there. I loved that it was going to be right by the Apollo. We were doing it at the Renaissance Hotel, which is, I think, a newer hotel. There is a hotel in Harlem, and they were laughing. They were like, we didn't know there was a hotel in Harlem. So that's where we were doing it. And I was super excited about it, had no thoughts about it. I was like, this is great. I'm going to get an opportunity to visit Harlem. And then when I showed up in I got a lift from the airport. And as we were driving there, and I started to notice, I was just like looking at my surroundings. Anytime I go to a new city or a new place, especially if it's a big city, you definitely are going to have more homelessness. There can be pockets where it can be more dangerous. And as a woman, right, like we have to pay attention to our surroundings and what is safe and what is not safe. And as we were driving around, I definitely had the questions of, I wonder if these particular streets are safe. Was that me just being a woman who was being careful with her surroundings? Or was I being a white woman whose inherent racism and subconscious thoughts based on my conditioning about Harlem, was that what was coming to play? I suspect the answer is both. I suspect the answer is both. I did not think that when I showed up to Harlem that I would have those thoughts. And I did. I did. As I was driving by there, right? Like we're going through the streets, not really seeing any white people. And there were definitely a lot more homeless people than I expected. Of course, I don't know why I would think that's not there, because we know that we historically do not provide for Black people and Black communities the way that we do for white communities. So if we struggle with homelessness in the white community, of course, why would I not be surprised that it might be even worse in a Black community? I found that interesting, that thought came up for me, and I could witness that I was uncomfortable. And I do not like when I have those thoughts and those feelings and emotions. So I had to sit with that. I had to witness that and kind of recognize where I was. Now, when I got there a day early, and so there were a few issues in my hotel room where like the AC wasn't working. There was a window that I thought potentially might fall out. And I was right in front of, I was like right at the front of the building, right in the front of the Apollo. Cause I called down. I was like, are these windows supposed to open? They're like, no. And I'm like, we've got a problem. So I didn't want to leave. I wanted to wait for the engineer to come up. And I had planned on going to Central Park because I had previously looked at a map and I was like, oh, it's like a mile and a half. And then I started having thoughts, is that safe? And again, maybe it wasn't. That can be a perfectly normal response to being a woman in a city you're not familiar with. And I guarantee you that part of that was I was a white woman in a Black community that has been taught that Harlem is not safe. I just want to acknowledge that and say that out loud. Um, we can be doing this work, we can be anti-racist, and we can still have very racist thoughts. And we have to sit with that, be aware of that. When we then did the group work, we were out in the community together, and I felt safer because we were in numbers. Again, part of that is just what we're taught as a woman, and part of that's related to racism. Harlem was such an amazing community, such an amazing community. There is so much vibrancy, so much music. Oh my gosh. The music that, so like I live in Nashville, which we call Music City, which while we're talking about racism, by the way, we think of Music City often because of country music. No, it's actually because of the Jubilee Singers out of Fisk University, which is a historically Black university. And they were actually performing for Queen Victoria, who said, this is the most amazing music, the most amazing voices. I'm not sure where you come from, but you must hail from Music City, Tennessee, or Music City, USA. It had nothing to do with country music. It had to do with Black gospel singers. But so like when we're driving, like when you just walk down the street, you hear all of this live music. Bands are playing. That's not what was in Harlem, but I mean, I'm going to call it a boombox because that's kind of when I grew up. But there was just music playing, and there was so much just rap and hip hop, and it was so soulful and energetic. And even at the hotel, the bar, it was so fun, and everybody is dressed up and they're having a good time and there's dancing and music, and the vibe is just a million times better than any white community vibe, right? We know this. We know this. But it was beautiful and sad to see how free Black people feel in a safe Black space where they may not feel safe to do that in a predominantly white space, which then led to the conversation around gentrification. Because there was a conversation of, white people don't really bring their conferences to Harlem, right? Like people will automatically stay in Midtown. So it's like if you're traveling through, depending where you are, it would actually make more sense to stay in the Harlem Renaissance. But why do people not do that? Well, part of that's racism, but also, does Harlem really want a bunch of white people coming in and staying in their neighborhood and their community? Um, and then we were talking about, well, part of that is, are you coming in to be entertained? Are you coming in to be an onlooker? We can do this sometimes, right? When we travel, whether it is, out of the country, or if you're a white person visiting Harlem, it's in a bit of a fishbowl, right? Where it's almost like voyeurism. Like, what is it that you're doing there? Is it truly there to experience the culture, or are you like this weird onlooker? And are you trying to bring your own culture there? Which leads to the gentrification. As we were walking around, I saw Whole Foods, and my first thought was, oh, I didn't expect to see that. Was that my racism showing up, assuming that there would not be a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods? Perhaps. And a lot of the Black people that were in our group were sharing, who had been to Harlem before, were sharing how those are the first signs of gentrification, and how the community is already changing, because those used to be shops that were owned by Black families, and now it's been bought out by these conglomerates. And I think one person shared, how it was wonderful that there's now fresh fruit, fresh produce, fresh food that they didn't have access to before, because grocery stores like that didn't want to come into the community. But now that they're there, is it to serve the community, or is it because they see that it's the next area that's going to be gentrified, and they're kind of bringing that with them? I have a friend who says they hate Trader Joe's because it is the first sign that a neighborhood is about to be gentrified. And apparently, I learned that some people are starting to call it Soha, like so South Harlem. Um, so they're even taking Harlem, the name, away. And so just being aware that if as white people, we're going to go visit communities like this, being willing to fully show up and not try to change the neighborhood, not trying to change the culture to suit our needs. As opposed to truly just being there and embracing and celebrating the culture that already exists. Again, without being voyeuristic. There's so many, right? Like there's so many layers with racism in America and throughout the world, but especially in the United States. And just acknowledging those thoughts and having those conversations, like we just don't talk about it because, I don't know about you, but growing up, we were taught like, you're not really supposed to talk about racism in public. Again, it's like politics and religion. You're supposed to stay away from it. But if we don't have these conversations, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. We have to change. It is past time. One of the things that we did was we got to visit the Schomburg, and that is at a public library in Harlem, and it is for Black history. It's a library that houses a lot of materials and literature that, in many ways, it was Schomburg and Hughes, Langston Hughes, who worked on that together. And it is this beautiful place that has all of this history. And one of the important pieces for them was actually that those materials, that history, be in a community that it belongs to, as opposed to being in Midtown. You can just go visit. You can just go visit. So if you go to Harlem, and I highly encourage you to go, it is wonderful. It is safe. It is beautiful, great culture. And you can just go to the library. It is free. And they have some amazing exhibits going on. But one of the things that I learned was there is this one area that was, and I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but I feel like it was like the Schomburg Reception Hall or something like that. And there is this beautiful piece of artwork, and under the artwork that tells a wonderful, wonderful story is the ashes of Langston Hughes. And when I was first in there, like we were taking pictures and photographs. And when I learned that Langston Hughes' ashes were under um, that room, I realized, oh, there's a piece of reverence here that I'm not acknowledging. Like this is holy ground. This is solemn ground. And it was very sombering. And I think that anytime we're doing the work of learning, it's it's great to be, I mean, I don't want to say entertained, but like when we go to a museum, like it's fun to learn, like, and to take it in and to see new things and to take the photos, but also really honoring, what's going on in that space. There was a room where we learned about the ABCs in the Black community. By the way, I did not know that history. I did not know that history. There's so much that we were not taught in predominantly white schools, and the children today get to come in, and their artwork blew me away. But they had A through Z, what each word meant, and they had artwork with it, and it was amazing in the sense that we talk about what children can handle. We talk about when we should start talking about racism with them. We talk about should it be taught in schools. And when you have Black and brown children come in and just do art and words around their experiences, what they're dealing with on a daily basis, if they can live it, if they can live through it, then white children can learn about it. And by the way, white adults, we can learn about it. And there was a lot for me to learn in that room from the artwork from the children. And so that was a really amazing exhibit that I encourage you to go see. And then now it's probably not going to, I don't know how long it's actually going to be there. But James Baldwin, there was an amazing exhibit with James Baldwin and a lot of his materials. And I will be the first to say that despite the fact that I saw myself as an ally, despite the fact that I saw myself as anti-racist, I was not familiar with the work of James Baldwin until I started participating in the On the Matter of Race. And that is a travesty. He was such a profound leader and still is. The anytime I read his work or I watch his videos, I learn something new. And he was he was having these conversations, what with that, I'm not good at math. 50, 60 plus years ago. And it was so poignant and so powerful. And I don't know that people fully understood what he was saying, because I don't know that when I first started listening and reading his work that I fully understood what he was saying. So if you're not familiar with James Baldwin, I highly encourage you to go watch some video interviews with him, read his books. There is still so much to be learned from him. He was a Black gay man in the 60s who still, in many ways, is a leading voice that we can learn from and lean into. So that exhibit was really, really powerful as well. I never would have visited those places but for being on the matter of race. As a white woman, I never would have had on my list, oh, I'm going to go visit Harlem. I'm going to go to this library. I'm going to go see these exhibits. I just wouldn't have. And there is so much opportunity for us to go and learn and have amazing experiences right here in our backyards, where as adults and as children, we can dig deeper, learn more, and show up more. I will also say that as we were walking there, as we were going to the subway, we were in two single file lines. Again, we were Black and white, but it was more white people than Black people. And we walked in silence in honor of everyone in Harlem and through the Harlem Renaissance, all the work that has been done, all of the people who have died, all of the oppression that exists. And so we are walking single file line and we are not speaking. And I could see the faces of people looking at us. And it appeared to me they were looks of trepidation. When white people are walking in a single file line and not speaking in a predominantly Black community, It's probably not safe. Like, what are they doing? What are they up to? And I was not expecting to have those feelings of really wanting to say, I'm a good one, right? Like we always want to be like, I'm a good one, even though we all still show up in very harmful ways, even when we don't know it. It was just that reminder of we continue to actually harm, whether it is truly going in and gentrifying, developing areas that don't belong to us, or coming in to save um, a community, right? It's like, oh, we're here. We will save you, right? So just knowing that we have done such a bad job in the past, just our presence can be fear inducing and raise eyebrows. And we just have to know that and sit with that. And for me, and I'm talking about myself, and knowing that it is what it is, right? Like I'm not there to show I'm a good person. That's not what it's about. It's about doing the work to make a difference, period. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is, so when we were at the Schomburg, we split up into two groups and we had a tour by a white man. And a lot of us were like, what's this white man going to do? What's he going to say that can really teach us about Black history in this community? And when we were doing one of our debriefs, some of the Black people in the room shared how meaningful it was for them to hear a white person know the history, to be there doing the work, to be there sharing the truth. It took me back. It was a bit of a full circle moment because I started doing On the Matter of Race, because I thought, I'm taking away these spots from Black people who should have this voice, right? Who am I to speak about it? And I learned something in that moment, which is, yes, we need to be hiring Black people, period. And not just for DEI work, right? Not just for the Black history work, right? In every area, we just need to be hiring more Black people, right? Hire them. And I'm not just talking about employees, your mentors, your leaders, just everything we're doing. Like, how can we hire more Black people? But also, I remember back in 2020 when Black women were calling me and asking me to come speak at their companies and firms. And I said, I don't think it needs to be a white woman. I don't want to take away something from a Black woman, right? Like, there, we have a budget. I'm like, I don't want to be taking that away. And it was a good intention, but it was harmful for a few reasons. One, if a Black woman comes to me and says, will you please help me? And I'm like, it should actually be a Black person. And they're like, but no one wants to listen to a Black person. I'm like, well, but it needs to be a Black person. Okay, I was not being an ally in that moment. I was focused on what I thought was the right thing to do. And I now see that that was a harm. That was a harm. And so I apologize for that. And moving forward, if you are a person of color and you need and want me to come into your organization because you think that they can hear that from me better than someone else, even though you and I both don't like that, if that's what you need, I will do it, and I will do it for free. Although I would love to talk about how we're then going to take whatever that budget money was and we're going to pay a Black person to also come in and speak, whether it is on that issue or another issue. If you are a white person wanting me to come in, the answer is no. You need to hire a Black person. But I also wanted to say, I do think that's a powerful reminder for us that if we are holding back because we're like, it's not really my place, just know that our knowing history, our speaking up about racism, our being involved and leading conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging can also be helpful in healing to the Black community. I did not realize that. I did not realize that until I was there. And I encourage you to consider joining On the Matter of Race. There are many levels. They are 6-month programs. The next one starts, I think, this week. So it's probably too late. But you know what? It's not too late to do. Go ahead and reach out and have a conversation because these do fill up. They fill up fast. So so you can go ahead and get on the wait list. You can go to theconflictcloser.com/matter-of-race. theconflictcloser.com/matter-of-race. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you learned something from that. Let's go have difficult, hard conversations, and let's go win this election. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, give the episode a like and leave a comment below so we can keep the conversation going. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future episode or announcement. Listening on Apple, Spotify, or another podcast app, you can watch the video and join in the after show conversation by visiting hustleandflowpodcast.com.